him about this question as well. Whether or not you, as a strength and conditioning coach, the pros and cons of you having played the sport of the athletes you train and not having played or participated in the sport, the athletes you train. Because I know JC, he's trained like triathletes and he's never done a triathlete in his life. But he says there's an advantage to not having played the sport because you have a completely open mind about what you can do with that athlete versus if you did the sport, you already put yourself in a box and say, well, this is what I've done. This is what I will do with your athlete. So Dr. Peacock, you first, because you train MMA fighters, but your experience is actually playing football.
I have a couple of different thoughts about this. Now, if we're looking at that private sector where JC Santana works, where he's working pretty much one-on-one, I kind of understand where he's coming from. I get that idea of like having an open mind, not really falling into the norms and the cultural norms that exist within certain sports. Now, I think if you're going into, the professional sports world, team-oriented sports, I think it's very beneficial to have some form of experience with that sport, just so you understand kind of what the standards are. I mean, there are just certain things that exist in sports, I want to call them just like cultural norms that exist in sports that have been around for 100 years, and they're not going away. So if you don't understand that, then you're really behind. Look, let's take something like hockey, for instance. Hockey does a lot of cycling. There's a lot of cycling that exists as soon as guys get off the ice following the game. This is part of the culture of hockey. Whether or not that's necessarily beneficial, I don't know. I think there's other ways that you could probably elicit some of the responses and accumulate some of the load and the adaptation that you're trying to get without putting them on a stationary bike for 45 minutes to 60 minutes at 11 p.m. in the locker room right after a game. But again, you also have to think about your position as a strength and conditioning coach, answering to the position coaches, answering to the head coaches. And if you're not following that sort of template that maybe they followed as a player or whatever the case is, I think you're in a bad position. In my specific case, like you said, I was a college football player and spent quite a few years coaching college football strength and conditioning prior to that transition into MMA. I think football is one of the sports it's really difficult to understand what you're walking into if you haven't done it. Being a strength and conditioning coach, walking into a room of 100 type A alpha males, nothing in that CSCS book is going to prepare you for what you're walking into. Nothing's going to prepare you for what happens when the skill coaches, the offensive and defensive coordinator, and the coach come in and the things that they're expecting to see in terms of how your programming it goes. So, I think there's definitely a benefit to the coaching persona when going into those scenarios, understanding what's sort of expected. But to answer that question, I think you can be effective not playing the sport. I would hope that based on my, almost decade now in combat sports, that, I've gotten pretty good at this, but I had no experience in combat sports prior to doing this. But there was a big learning curve, and there was a long period of time where luckily I had experts like Dr. Ricci and, all the other great people, Chris Algieri, guys like that, I could lean on to really understand. I had a great strength and conditioning coach, Jake Bonacci, that I worked with at the Black Cillians when I first got into the MMA. And I'll be honest, I was just very fortunate because he already had a ton of world titles under his belt, worked with Randy Couture in his heyday, Vitor Belfort in his heyday. And I think he was a really good person for me to meet because he was able to look at the programming, look at the things I was doing and make some adjustments and make me understand why I think I was killing them with volume. I was used to football. I'm used to volume, where these guys are training 10 times a week outside of your strength and conditioning programs. And it was like, it was really just me running them into the ground, me destroying them. and without Jake, I wouldn't have even understood. I just didn't get it. Started to attend practices and things like that and really picked it up more.
I have a question. You mentioned the culture of a sport, and it makes sense that in professional hockey or professional football, or even top level college football, that the athletes have to buy into what you as a strength coach, and even you as whoever the head coach and position coaches are,
Sure.
And I remember there was a seminar given at our university. I think Steve Orris was giving it, and a student asked this interesting question, and then I'll dovetail it into a secondary question. He said, "You have to be large to coach football, be the strength coach." And I guess dovetailing with that, because there's a cultural aspect to it. How would a woman, obviously who's never played football, be taken, in a locker room of a bunch of alpha males who are not? These are not wallflowers. These are guys who were at one point the best in their high school. Then they get to college, they're still among the best. And now you have a female, or let's say a small strength and conditioning coach. There's a reality there. So explain what that reality could be.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's, when we look at that, and again, it's very not traditional, right? We're at a point in time where, if you still look across the scheme of male and female coaches throughout like the NFL and college football and stuff like that, I mean, it's probably less than 1%, I guess, would be a female coach if I had to guess. Now, the one thing that I will say, and I think it's been cool to see sort of that evolution. It's, realistically, these sports science roles, I feel, have sort of opened some of those doors for female coaches. I think that's been sort of a segue into the coaches really, for the female coaches to get their foot in the door and really do well. If you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they have a great female strength and conditioning sports science coach, and a Super Bowl ring to go with it. I know University of Maryland had a great female sports scientist. I was just at a seminar, our NSCA this summer, and heard about some of the work she was doing, and I believe she's at Texas now. So it's interesting, like you said, it's a paradigm where it's not the norm. I know how a football team would react and take and do to that. It's definitely one of those things that it's not traditional, and anything that's not traditional takes time. I mean, it's just one of those things. You can't expect it. You can't expect this non-traditional route just to be completely normal like that. It's not going to be the case. And I guarantee you, if you ask, some of those female pioneers that are in that position, I guarantee you their trajectory to where there wasn't necessarily the traditional route that maybe a Division I or former pro football player took to the helm of that head strength and conditioning role. It's just, it's just one of those things. It's definitely a different path. It's definitely different, social norms that come along with it that, we're finally starting to see some transitions in a different direction. So it's cool to see that field sort of evolve where it's at now.